guys, Joshua with the Update channel, and sorry to report, folks, in this video, it finally happened. I'm working on a Cummins engine.
You sold your soul to Satan.
We knew it was going to happen, folks, you know, but let's see what we can do about this situation. So what exactly is going on here? And I actually don't hate Cummins. I'm just not as familiar with them as the cats, but I've actually done a lot of fuel system troubleshooting on these smaller Cummins, and that's what we're going to be doing on this one. So this one we have a 4713 code, which those of you that don't speak matrix, that's engine fuel injection quantity error for multiple cylinders, congestion exist, amber, which means active, and the amber is like the level. But so what's going on? Well, let me show you. So you can probably hear the engine's running. I've got part of the dash apart here too. Here's some of it. They've got some fan issues, but our coolant temp here needs to get up to 190 before we can do our tests, at least according to Cummins. And you can see this one's got over 200,000 miles. It's in a delivery vehicle, so probably idles a lot. And it's got check engine light on. So that check engine light is for this condition. What this condition means is that the injectors are returning too much fuel, and they're not. The ECM seeing the rail pressure not do what it's supposed to do, so it throws this code. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a test that checks for the volume of return fuel from the injectors. What do I mean by that?
I don't know what that means.
So what it means is we're going to be running a fuel line from the injector return line off the back of the head. And here's what we're doing currently, because we're trying to warm the engine up. And once it's up to temperature, we're going to be measuring how much fuel is coming out of that line. Now the line you can see that I'm tapped off into here is the injector fuel return line. There are 3 return lines off the engine though. There's this, which is the rail pressure relief return line, which should not be flowing anything. Then you have your injector return relief, but it also ties into your common rail high pressure pump. It has its own return, which this yellow line I've installed to bypass that back to the tank. Now, you also need to have Cummins Insight, because you have to do a test called fuel leakage test, which basically bumps the pressure in the rail, which is what we're looking at currently, up to about 25,000 psi. Now you can see we're at about 190 degrees. We have my measuring cup here. It needs to be glass also. I had a plastic one of these, and the fuel will literally just cause the plastic to kind of disintegrate over time and become very cloudy. We're still pumping it back to the tank. Hey, look at that. Engine oil's coming out of the power steering reservoir. Excellent. Also a problem on this engine. So we are ready to do our test here. So I've bypassed sending it back to the tank, and I've got my cool 20-gallon black pan here I'm draining it into temporarily. We're going to time for 30 seconds and measure the return flow volume. And I don't mean how loud it is. I mean the volume as in the amount. So 30 seconds, I'm not going to have you wait that long watching this fill. Where are we at? Remember, 150 milliliters. So we're over 150. We're about 160, so it's over specification. Now that plug I was holding there, that is an injector line block-off plug. So what you do is you pull your fuel injector one at a time. Then you're going to install that. And what that does is it allows you to isolate each injector and see which one is causing it to leak, or if multiple are causing it. Now these injector lines on the rail are very, very difficult to get to with everything in place. I'm using this crow's foot here with an extension, and Cummins tells you to wait 10 minutes after each time you do the test, because there's supposed to be rail pressure in this rail, several hundred psi minimum, at all times with the engine off. But as you can see here, there's nothing. I actually monitor the rail pressure. It drops to 0 almost immediately, which is a problem also, probably tied in with injector problem here. You can see I've installed the plug. When you're doing this test though, you also want to check for tightness on the nut that holds the coil tube or fuel connector in, because if that's loose, it can also cause high leakage return. So we've blocked off number 1 injector fuel line, and we're going to redo our test. Now you can hear, if your ears are adept enough, that it has a miss, and of course that's because we have number 1 fuel line off. So the point of this test is to see by how much each injector drops the volume. So this is with number 1 blocked off. Remember, we were at about 160. Now we're just under 125. So we've lost about 30 to 40 milliliters by cutting off number 1. Now you got to move on to number 2. I guess you don't have to move on to number 2. You can move on to whatever one you want, but you should move on to the next one. So what you have to understand while doing this test is this total test takes a long time to do. First, you have to have all the lines and everything for blocking off and plugging to measure the fuel return volume, but you have to get it up to temperature, and then you're taking an initial test, and then you're also having to do this, which I've sped up 500% every time you stop the test. You have to remove the fuel line, install the old fuel line, put the plug in, and then measure it. So it is time consuming. So these are our number 2 results. We're sitting about 125, just like number 1. Number 3 is also around 125. And then it moves to just below 100 for 4, 5, and also 6. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that 4, 5, and 6 are returning more fuel because by blocking them off, you've reduced the amount of fuel return volume. So what does that mean? Well, if you wanted to, you could do 4, 5, and 6 by itself. However, with discussing with the customer and the mileage of the truck, decided to do all 6. Now, haven't done these style injectors before, but read up on them, and they're easy and difficult. Some things are harder. One thing, the exhaust rockers have to be removed because one of the hold-down bolts is over or under the rocker. That's kind of, I don't like that design feature. You shouldn't have to remove overhead rocker assemblies to do injectors on a common rail system, in my opinion. Here's one thing I don't like. These stupid brass inserts in the valve cover base. It ripped right out of the valve cover. That's kind of a stupid design. I guess that's best they can do, but it was a pain to get that out. Here's something weird, Cat, I've never seen on Cat. The valve cover gasket is also the injector harness, or you could say the injector harness is also the valve cover gasket. I guess that's good because it's combined, it's cheaper, but if you have to replace one or the other, you have to replace the one part, which is very expensive. Now that little nut there I was showing you is the coil tube, or as Cummins calls it, fuel connector retaining nut. That's the nut that pushes the coil tube, I'm going to call it, into the injector. So you can see it's installed there. I've removed it on number 1 because I'm going to be removing number 1 injector. So you can see once the nut is removed, you can just pull the coil tube out. There is an O-ring, so you can't always just pull them out by hand. You'll have to use like a little fitting or something, and you can see there's an alignment pin on top of that also to pop it out. That alignment pin needs to be aligned when it goes back in. So once the coil tube is out, you can take the injector hold-down bolts off. Now notice I've removed the rocker, I've removed the injector harness / valve cover gasket, and also removed the valve cover base. Makes everything easier. According to Cummins, these bolts are reusable. That's unusual for me because on Cats you do not reuse injector hold-down bolts. So, also different from Cat, the injector hold-down bracket, or brace if you want to call it that, is removable. Pretty much on the Cat injectors, it's part of it. At least on the C7, C9, stuff like that. So it has an alignment slot. That slot goes over a pin that's in the injector to help align it because remember, your coil tube needs to be forced into the injector, so it needs to be aligned properly. That alignment down needs to face the exhaust side of the engine. Now, you might be seeing some Cat wire loom there. I'll explain that in a second. I'm going to be using one of these index gear wrench pry bars, heel bars, if you want to call it that. And there's like a large washer machined into the bottom of the injector. That seems to be the best place to pop these out. There's not really a good place other than that to pry on the injector itself. We're not reusing the injectors, so you don't have to be super careful, but there are cores on them, so you don't want to damage them. One thing I do like about these injectors, they are only one little O-ring on them, so it makes them fairly easy to get in and get out. When installing the new ones, which I did after this video because we're waiting on parts, you can just push them in by hand. Now, one thing you do need to check, you see that little brass or bronze, it's brass, washer on the bottom, make sure that comes out with the injector. If that stayed with the injector, or it stayed in the head, and then you put another injector in, that would be a bad day, because then it would misalign the coil tube. Unfortunately, we did not get the replacement injectors until several days after this footage was taken, so I wasn't able to show you installing them and whatnot. Like I said, I'm not a Cummins expert. Hopefully learn a little bit in this video and see what I was working on. No destruction of the week this week, but thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.